All right, so are you ready to dive into some seriously spooky stories? You guys sent in some real-life horror stories, and we're going to dig into them. We've got haunted house in England, a demonic presence in Pittsburgh, and the infamous Alcatraz prison.
I have to say, your choice of locations is really fascinating. It's like each one of these places is just this uh, pressure cooker of history and human emotion. And, some people believe that creates a perfect breeding ground for paranormal activity.
Yeah, it really does feel like these places have just absorbed all this energy from the past, like they're just waiting to unleash it all. So let's start with the Black Monk of Pontefract.
Okay.
This one takes place at 30 East Drive in Pontefract, England. Just your typical haunted house.
Right. Charming 3-bedroom, comes with a free spectral assault. No, but in all seriousness, the Pritchard family moved into this seemingly ordinary home in 1966, and they quickly discovered that their new address came with an unwelcome guest.
And one that didn't even pay rent. But you mentioned this entity was violent. What makes this case stand out, even among other poltergeist stories?
Well, I think most hauntings start subtly, right? You get strange noises, flickering lights, objects moving. But this case, the entity, they nicknamed him Fred, just went straight for the jugular.
Oh, wow. So like a demonic welcome wagon.
Pretty much, yeah. It started pushing, scratching, and even throwing really heavy objects around. Can you imagine? You're just unpacking in your new home and suddenly a bookcase comes flying at your head.
I would nope right out of there. But this house was near an old gallows site, right? Could there be a connection?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, I think. See, legend has it that a monk was hanged at that site centuries ago, and some people believe that his spirit is just restless, seeking revenge, and they think that that might be the source of all these terrifying events.
So Fred is like the ghost of this hanged monk, still holding a grudge after all these years. That's creepy. But even for a vengeful spirit, that level of violence seems pretty extreme.
It's true, it wasn't just objects moving, it was the sheer force behind it. Like, one report even describes furniture being hurled across the room during a family gathering and claw marks appearing on the walls, like something was trying to rip the house apart from the inside.
Oh, now that's just scary. Claw marks. That's straight out of a horror movie.
It really is. And it's almost as if this entity was feeding off of the energy of the gathering, all those heightened emotions, maybe even the fear itself.
This makes me think about the whole nature of poltergeists. Some researchers believe that they're not actually spirits, but more like manifestations of psychic energy, often coming from a living person, especially someone under a lot of stress. What do you think about that?
That is a fascinating theory, isn't it? I mean, could someone in that family have been maybe unknowingly causing this chaos? Like maybe a child with, repressed anger or fear acting as a conduit for all this chaotic energy?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought. Maybe we're not always dealing with some external entity. Maybe it's our own minds, and the power that they hold that we don't even realize. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's head over to Pittsburgh. This one's a little different. We've got a family moving into their dream home on Brownsville Road, and they discover a pretty dark secret connected to the property.
This one is the Demon of Brownsville Road, and it goes deep into the demonic, right? Yeah. This isn't just about a haunting. It's about a potential demonic presence that tormented this family for years.
Yeah, you've been researching this a lot, these hauntings, and it seems like so many of them are tied to these locations with a troubled past.
It's true.
This Brownsville Road case definitely fits that pattern.
Yeah.
So yeah, Bob and Lisa Cranmer, they buy this beautiful house back in 1988, totally unaware of the darkness lurking beneath the surface. What do you think about the history of this property? What do you think might have contributed to this whole demonic situation?
Well, can you imagine moving into your dream home and then you find out that the people who lived there before were messing around with the occult, maybe even committed a murder on the property? We're talking rituals, dark energies, maybe even a portal to another dimension.
A portal? It's just asking for trouble.
Yeah.
Did the Cranmers experience any warning signs before things went full-on demonic?
It started subtly, just like most of them do. They had mysterious knocking. It seemed to come from inside the walls, shadowy figures lurking around, blood-like stains appearing out of nowhere. Just your typical welcome home package.
How delightful. So it started with the classic haunted house stuff?
Yeah.
But then it escalated.
Exactly, and it escalated quickly. The family started experiencing actual physical attacks, scratches, burns. They even felt like they were being suffocated at night.
Yeah, no thank you. I'm out. Mysterious knocks I can handle. But if those invisible roommates start getting handsy, I'm finding a new place.
Did the Cranmers try to fight back? Bob Cranmer. He was very thorough. He documented everything that was happening. He reported furniture moving violently and guttural growls echoing through the house. It was all very unnerving. But it wasn't just a mischievous spirit, playing pranks. This felt malevolent, deliberate.
Guttural growls. Now, you've mentioned in your research that you're skeptical of demonic possession. Do you think that Cranmer's experiences were really demonic? Or is there another explanation? They did have exorcisms, right?
They did. Multiple exorcisms were performed on that house. And the priests who did those rituals, they felt a real darkness there, like a force that was fighting back against them. It was a long and terrifying ordeal for that family. It went on for years. So whether you believe in demonic possession or not, something was happening there, something very powerful and unsettling.
That's a really good point. It makes you think about the power of belief, and ritual. Maybe it's not even about whether demons literally exist. Maybe it's more about the energy that we put into these beliefs, the fear, the rituals. It makes it real.
It's true.
It makes it tangible, and it's terrifying. But even if it wasn't a literal demon, the fact that the Cranmers called in priests for multiple exorcisms tells you they were dealing with something truly scary.
Absolutely. Imagine living in that house, constantly in fear, never knowing when you might be attacked next.
No, thank you. Okay, I think we need to change the scenery after that one. Let's move on to a location that's really well known for its chilling history. It's inescapable. Alcatraz Island.
Yes, Alcatraz, the Rock. It's a place that's really captured imaginations for decades, not just as a prison, but as this symbol of isolation, confinement. And, if the stories are true, it's a real hotbed for paranormal activity.
Yeah. It's almost like the island itself is like a character in this whole story. And it's not just the prison's history that's so unsettling. This idea of layered history is fascinating. Alcatraz wasn't always a prison, was it?
No, not at all.
It was a Civil War fort.
It was.
And even before that, it was a Native American burial ground.
Exactly. It's like all those layers of history, All those lives, all those losses have left this imprint on the island. The energy is just soaked into those rocks, those buildings. Do you think that makes Alcatraz more prone to hauntings than a place with a less intense past?
I think it adds to the whole atmosphere.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
It's almost like the island's this giant echo chamber, just amplifying all those whispers from the past.
Yeah.
What kind of hauntings have been reported there? Are we talking shadowy figures, like in striped jumpsuits?
Well, the reports are all over the place, really. They're as varied as the island's history, I guess you could say. Some are subtle, like guards would hear moans and footsteps, ghostly whispers in the empty cells. Can you imagine? You're a guard walking those corridors late at night. You've heard all the stories, but you're trying to be logical about it, right? And then you hear whisper, footsteps. I think I'd put in for a transfer to a desk job.
I always thought ghosts had terrible taste in interior design. I mean, all those cold, damp cells. No wonder they're so grumpy. But speaking of grumpy ghosts, what about the stories from solitary confinement? Those must be especially creepy.
Oh, absolutely. Just imagine the psychological impact of being locked up in solitary, already cut off from everyone, and then on top of that, you start experiencing something you can't explain. Some of the inmates claim to be attacked by shadowy figures, tormented by these unseen forces. Do you think the isolation of Alcatraz just made everything worse? It made them more susceptible to these experiences.
Isolation can definitely mess with your mind. Like all your senses are on high alert. Your imagination just runs wild. But one of the most famous stories from Alcatraz involves this cell 14D.
Oh, yeah.
It's often called the most haunted cell on the island.
Cell 14D is a really chilling example of how the prison's history and that isolation might have amplified paranormal activity.
It wasn't just any cell, right?
Right.
It was designed for solitary confinement. And you mentioned earlier that you're interested in the psychological aspects of hauntings.
Yeah.
And the inmate in cell 14D was already isolated, completely cut off from human contact, and then to have this entity tormenting him.
It makes you wonder, does isolation make us more vulnerable to those experiences? Does it somehow weaken our defenses?
Or maybe it makes those entities bolder.
Yeah.
Knowing they have a captive audience. It's like a predator that can sense weakness. If you're already feeling vulnerable, isolated, afraid, you're the perfect target.
That's a scary thought. And it makes you wonder if that's why so many paranormal hotspots are those places of isolation. Prisons, asylums, abandoned buildings, those places where that energy of fear and loneliness might just linger. And it creates this breeding ground for hauntings.
Well, it's almost like our primal instincts are picking up on something, some unseen danger in the shadows. Like, our ancestors huddled around a fire, feeling the presence of predators in the dark. Maybe we're not as evolved as we think we are. Maybe those primal fears are still hardwired into us.
And maybe those fears are what make these stories so captivating, We're drawn to the darkness, the unknown, to those things that make us shiver, question everything we thought we knew. The inmate in cell 14D, he reported feeling these icy chills, seeing ghostly apparitions. He claimed a dark figure was watching him, and he was found dead in his cell. His face was contorted in terror.
Oh, that's awful. It makes you wonder, can these entities interact with us on a physical level? Can they actually harm us? Or even kill us? That's a pretty scary thought. But then again, I mean, we're talking about ghosts and demons and poltergeists. It's not like we're dealing with Casper the Friendly Ghost here, are we?
No, we are not. And that's exactly what makes these stories so compelling, right? They tap into our deepest fears, our fascination with the unknown, our desire to understand these forces that shape our lives, both seen and unseen. But Alcatraz isn't just about individual cells and solitary confinement. We also have to think about the impact of the 1940s riot.
Oh, right. That was brutal. Multiple prisoners died. And they say their spirits still linger on the island, causing cold spots, eerie noises. It's almost like the island itself is a recording of its own history. And these events are just the tracks that keep playing over and over again.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, are these entities aware of their actions? Are they trying to communicate something? Or are they just trapped in some kind of loop, reliving their final moments? It's a fascinating thought, and a little bit scary, to be honest.
It's like the line between the living and the dead, the past and the present. It's all blurred in these places. We have these individual stories, these personal encounters, but they're all happening in this larger context of Alcatraz Island. It's a place with such a heavy, concentrated history. Violence and isolation. It's like a perfect storm of everything we've been talking about.
It is. It's like a pressure cooker of paranormal energy.
You've got the old gallows site near the Black Monk's house, the dark history of that Brownsville Road property, and then all the layers upon layers of history at Alcatraz. It's almost as if the land itself is holding on to these stories, these energies.
Exactly. It really is like a pressure cooker. The individual hauntings are scary enough on their own, but then you add in the island's history, the isolation, the sheer number of people who experience something strange there. It all adds up.
So what do you think? Are these locations cursed? Or is there some other explanation for why they seem to attract so much paranormal activity?
Well, the idea of a curse is definitely intriguing, isn't it? It suggests that there's this supernatural force at play, something that binds these spirits, these entities, to specific places, like the land is somehow tainted, by the events that happen there, and that somehow attracts or creates paranormal phenomena.
But what if it's not a curse? What if these locations are like, I don't know, conduits?
Conduits for what?
Well, conduits for energy, for memories, for emotions. What if these places, because of their history, are just more sensitive to the energy of the spiritual realm? Like a thin spot in the veil between our world and the next?
That's interesting.
And maybe that's why we see so much activity in places with a lot of history, especially history of violence or tragedy. It's like the energy of those events gets imprinted on the location. And then, under the right conditions, it manifests as hauntings or poltergeist activity or even, demonic entities.
And maybe those conditions are triggered by something as simple as human fear.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying our own fear could be what brings these hauntings to life?
Think about it. In each of these stories, fear plays a huge role. The Pritchard family, they were terrified of the Black Monk. The Crammers were terrified of the entity in their home. And even the guards at Alcatraz. I mean, as tough as they were still afraid of what they couldn't explain.
So you're saying our fear is like what? An amplifier, boosting the signal, making the hauntings stronger and more real.
Exactly. It's a chilling thought. But it also, in a way, gives us some sense of agency. If we can control our fear, maybe we can control the hauntings. But this is where it gets really interesting. If these locations are conduits for energy, and if our fear can amplify that energy, then wouldn't a place like Alcatraz, where isolation and fear were just rampant, wouldn't that be like a breeding ground for hauntings?
It's like a pressure cooker for paranormal activity.
That's a great way to put it.
The isolation intensifies the fear feeds the entities get stronger, and it makes you wonder, are there other places like that out there? Places where isolation and fear have just created these hotbeds of activity. Abandoned hospitals, asylums, prisons. The possibilities are endless and kind of terrifying.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've got these locations that are like conduits for spiritual energy, and our own fear can make that energy stronger, make those hauntings more powerful. But here's another thought. If these locations are conduits, maybe they're not just conduits for negative energy. Maybe they can also be conduits for positive energy, healing energy, for connection.
Whoa. Okay, that's a lot to process. But it's also incredibly fascinating. So you're saying instead of being places of fear and despair, these locations could become places of healing and transformation.
It's a possibility.
That's a fascinating concept.
What if, instead of approaching these locations with fear, we approach them with respect, with compassion, with a genuine desire to understand? What if we could actually change the energy there, transform those negative vibrations into something more harmonious?
It's like taking a haunted house and turning it into a sanctuary. Instead of running away from the ghosts, we invite them in for a key, try to understand their stories.
Exactly. It's a radical idea, but I think it's worth exploring. Because I believe that ultimately, these hauntings, these echoes of the past, they're trying to tell us something.
That's a really profound thought. Maybe, instead of being afraid of the ghosts, we should be listening to them.
Perhaps they hold the keys to some of the biggest mysteries of life and death, the seen and unseen. Maybe they're trying to warn us, or guide us, or even help us understand ourselves better.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. That's a whole new way of looking at things. It's like cosmic therapy.
It's about shifting our perspective, recognizing that we're not just observers in this universe, we're active participants. We have the power to shape our reality, to influence these energies around us, and learn from those echoes of the past.
This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey. We've gone from the terrifying to the thought-provoking, from haunted houses to the nature of reality itself.
We've explored the darkness, faced our fears, and hopefully come away with a deeper appreciation for the mysteries that are still out there.
And who knows what other secrets are waiting to be uncovered as we keep exploring.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? The journey never bends.
So to all of our listeners, thanks for joining us.
We hope you enjoyed the chills, the thrills, and all the thought-provoking conversation. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see those shadows a little differently from now on. Sweet dreams. And keep exploring. It's just tragic, no doubt about it. It makes you wonder, could his fear, his isolation, have contributed to his death? Or was it something more, something that sought him out in that state?
It's a question that really sticks with me. Because if these entities can actually affect our physical well-being, that raises the stakes.
Yeah, it really blurs the lines, doesn't it? Between the supernatural and the psychological. What's real, what's imagined, what power does our mind have in all of this?
And that takes us back to what you were saying about fear being a catalyst. If our fear can actually make paranormal activity stronger, then a place like Alcatraz, a place designed to create fear and isolation, well, wouldn't that be like a feeding ground for these entities?
Exactly. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison. It was a psychological experiment in control and isolation, designed to break people, instill fear, hopelessness.
So they were almost creating the perfect conditions for a paranormal hotspot.
Right.
Without even meaning to. Like they built this haunted house and then filled it with the most vulnerable people imaginable.
And those people, they brought their own issues, their own traumas. It's like all that negativity was just swirling around, creating this vortex of despair. And maybe it lingered, even after the prison closed.
That's a pretty heavy thought. That a place created by humans to punish, to isolate others, could become a beacon for something darker, something beyond our control. But let's shift gears a bit. You mentioned earlier that these locations, they might not just be conduits for negative energy. Is there a positive side to this?
It's a question I think about a lot. If these places are sensitive to energy, to emotions, then maybe they could also be open to, positive vibrations.
So instead of being places of fear and despair, they could actually be places of healing, places of transformation.
It's a possibility.
That's a really fascinating concept.
What if, instead of fear and trepidation, we approach these places with respect, with compassion, a real desire to understand? What if we could change the energy, transform those negative vibes into something more harmonious?
It's like turning a haunted house into a sanctuary. Instead of running from the ghosts, we invite them in for a cup of tea.
Exactly. It's a radical idea, I know, but I think it's worth thinking about, because I truly believe that these hauntings, these echoes of the past, they're trying to tell us something.
That's a really profound thought. So instead of being afraid of the ghosts, maybe we should be listening to them.
Maybe they hold the keys to understanding life and death, the seen and the unseen. Maybe they're trying to warn us or guide us, or even help us understand ourselves a little better.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. That's a whole new way of looking at these stories, like a cosmic therapy session.
It's all about perspective. We're not just observers in this universe, we're active participants. We have the power to shape our reality, influence the energy around us, and learn from the past.
This deep dive has been quite the journey. From terrifying to thought-provoking, haunted houses to the very nature of reality.
We've explored the darkness, we've faced our fears, and I hope we've come out of it with a better understanding of the mysteries out there.
And who knows what other secrets are waiting to be discovered.
That's what makes it so exciting, right? The journey never really ends. So to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us.
We hope you enjoyed the chills, the thrills, and the conversation.
And maybe you'll see the shadows a little differently now. Sweet dreams, everyone, and keep exploring.